Coming to you from sunny South Carolina, it's the Palmetto Conservative Show with your host, Jim Lee. From the upstate to the low country, from the coast to Columbia, we'll cover what's right and uncover what's wrong in the Palmetto State. If we see it, we say it. We call it like it is in South Carolina. And now, it's the Palmetto Conservative Show. Let's jam.
Welcome into Hour 2 of the Palmetto Conservative Show here on the Conservative Broadcast Media Network. I'm your host, Jim Lee, part political junkie, part technology geek, part commentator, and often snarky agitator for the application of common sense and the pursuit of critical thinking in the marketplace of ideas, particularly as it relates to the Palmetto State. I don't profess to have all the answers, folks, just an awful lot of relevant questions. If you were listening into Hour 1, you're probably wondering, what in the wide world of sports did that have to do with the Palmetto State? Well, while I am hopeful that my audience here is more diverse than just those in the state of South Carolina, those in the state of South Carolina need to be thinking about these topics. You know, very often we find ourselves enamored with the appearance of things and the nonsense from the talking heads about looking presidential and so forth. And very often we find ourselves in situations where we accept the analysis by some of these pundits, i.e. the New York Times and the like, and we become complacent and we become dependent on the federal government. And you know, South Carolina very often finds itself in the path of an occasional hurricane. The upstate of South Carolina very often finds itself with ice storms and other things that result in major power outages and trees down and so on and so forth. Is our state government ready, willing, and able to respond? We saw several years ago one of our more recent governors in his first term in office really took the heat for the hurricane response. Now, to his credit, he responded to that, learned from it, and we were better prepared going forward, as was demonstrated with the ensuing hurricane that followed. But the point is, who is ultimately on point to deal with these sorts of things? So, yep, it does matter. So, as we continue to rail against the cacistocracy, glad you're with us here tonight, and again, hoping to get the telephone connectivity squared away such that we can actually take calls once again. My favorite part of the show is engaging with people, having a little banter back and forth, and it'll also enable us to get back into the practice of actually having guests here on the Palmetto Conservative Show. Not that I struggle to find things to talk about for 2 hours, but it's often a lot more fun to do so with somebody else. So as we continue to rail against the cacistocracy here, just a reminder, folks, you can ignore politics, but that doesn't mean politics is going to ignore you. So where do we go from here? In the news, this isn't simply a matter of piling on because, well, quite frankly, I don't think there's enough people on the pile to qualify this as piling on to anything. This whole Benghazi situation, the federal government's response to the attack on our consulate in Benghazi, the attack on our sovereign soil. This is the equivalent of, somebody attacking New Jersey, not just Benghazi. But the response and what happened, we still don't know the full story. But for those who are not so ideologically blinded, those who are not so overwhelmed by everything else going on, that take a moment to think critically about the entire story and not just the occasional soundbite, be it on Fox News or MSNBC. You have to ask yourself, what in the wide world of sports is going on in this administration? Do they really take us for such rubes, such ignorant or stupid people? I mean, I know that we cling to our God and our guns, but, are we doing so with our knuckles dragging on the ground and spit just draping from our mouths as we drool? I mean, if you have served in the military in any capacity, and in particular if you served in the oxymoronic field of military intelligence, just the reports in the public domain, amongst the public sources, newspapers, television, radio, you know that particularly with the technology that we have today, the connections that we have, the fact that we live in an instantaneous microwave society, that there is no way on this earth that U.S. soil, a United States embassy or consulate could possibly have been attacked, regardless of the motivation for it, regardless of who did the attacking. But that something like that could happen in the dark, and that the highest level of government would not be aware of it. We have a system of alerts within the defense community, such that when things like this happen, it raises to the highest level of attention in the government. And by highest level of attention, I'm talking about the President's National Security Staff or the President himself. And usually the President's National Security Staff is going to tell the President, particularly for some of these things that rise to such a critical level, such as United States sovereign territory being attacked. But then to politically traipse out a whole host of administration officials to tell a story that, quite frankly, the average teenager can come up with a better set of lies and deceptions than what this administration did. I mean, really? A YouTube video was the root cause of all this? And what intelligence do we have that leads us to believe that Egyptians and Libyans were all simultaneously watching the same YouTube channel? Or that they really are that closely intertwined, that in real time they recognize that there's this offensive video out there and we need to respond to this. And the way we're going to respond is we're going to attack the United States embassies, or consulates in this case. I mean, please, Mr. President, give us a little credit. But then as you follow the story, and it continues on, this is worse than, your 5-year-old being caught in a lie. And then they continue to try and come up with an even more elaborate lie and to embellish even more in order to cover up the shortcoming here and to carry on and on and on. And in particular, if you're a parent, you know what I'm talking about. But why does Benghazi matter? Well, beyond the contempt that I feel from this president and this administration, that they really think that I'm that stupid that I can't put 2 and 2 together, It matters because the president's response, forget the fact that he's not been forthcoming with information, but the president's response is such that he is looking for the next person to throw under the bus, to kick down the stairs, to pull the rug out from under. Choose whatever metaphor you want to use. It's just one thing after the other that this president continues, rather than stepping forward and, dare I say it, looking presidential and taking full responsibility. This president hasn't done that. So it matters because, one, those of us that have half a brain feel the contempt from this president. Number two, it makes this president look even smaller still than he does. And then number three, and most importantly, the last cover-up that resulted in people at the highest levels of government was equally as stupid, but in the course of it, national security was not placed at risk. Our people were not placed in harm's way as a result of the poor decisions. And people who lost loved ones, needlessly probably, in my opinion, aren't being stonewalled and stiff-armed when it comes to finding out the truth about what happened to their loved ones. That's why it matters. You're listening to the Palmetto Conservative Show here on the Conservative Broadcast Media Network. Stick with us. We'll be right back.
I always loved watching the kids play basketball. I still do, even though things have changed. It's funny, they can't find jobs to get their careers started, and I can't afford to retire. And now we're all living together again. I supported President Obama because he spoke so beautifully. He promised change, but things changed for the worse. Obama started spending like our credit cards have no limit. His healthcare law made health insurance even more expensive. We've had stimulus and bailouts. Obama added almost $16,000 in debt for every American. How will my kids pay that off when they can't even find jobs? Now Obama wants more spending and taxes. That won't fix things. I had so many hopes. Cutting taxes and debt and creating jobs. That's the change we need. Tell President Obama to cut the job-killing debt and support the New Majority Agenda at New Majority Agenda.